All right, let's get right into it. We're diving into a really powerful chapter from the Uprooted Chinar, and it's all about a time of incredible contrast in Kashmir's history, the Mughal era. Now, on one hand, you have this picture of breathtaking imperial splendor. I mean, think stunning gardens, magnificent courts, the whole aesthetic of an empire. But, and this is a big but, underneath all that polished beauty, a shadow is growing, especially for the valley's indigenous Pandit community.
So that really brings us to the core question here, doesn't it? How can a single era be known for both stunning, jaw-dropping beauty and just brutal oppression? It sounds like a total contradiction, but for the Kashmiri pundits, it wasn't a contradiction at all. It was their everyday reality. It was like living in a gilded cage, absolutely beautiful on the outside, but inside, it was a trap that challenged their very existence. So let's dig into how that was even possible.
Okay, so let's set the scene. The year is 1586. The Mughal Emperor Akbar the Great, he personally leads the campaign to bring Kashmir into the empire. And just like that, the independent sultanate is gone. The valley is now tied to a throne way off in Delhi. I mean, on one hand, Kashmir just became part of one of the greatest empires in history. But on the other, this move kicked off a totally new, really complex power dynamic.
And wow, did the Mughals leave their mark. You can just picture it, can't you? These incredible terraced gardens just flowing down the hillsides, fountains whispering in marble courts, the air thick with the smell of roses and the sound of poetry. This was the imperial dream, right? Kashmir as a paradise on earth, a summer getaway for emperors. But all of that beauty? It was a mask, a stunning facade hiding some really deep tensions, just simmering right below the surface.
So here's what's so fascinating about this whole period. Mughal policy, it wasn't just one thing. Think of it more like a pendulum, swinging back and forth, sometimes wildly, between tolerance and straight-up persecution. And what pushed that pendulum? Well, it all came down to the personality, the politics of whoever was emperor, sitting on a throne hundreds of miles away. It's crazy to think about, but the fate of the entire pundit community could literally change with the stroke of a pen in Delhi.
And you can really see that shift right here on this timeline. We kick things off with Akbar, who was pretty famous for trying to blend different religions. Then you get his son, Jahangir, a huge arts guy who absolutely loved Kashmir. But then the mood starts to shift. It gets darker with Shah Jahan, and then it turns downright bleak under the super-orthodox rule of Aurangzeb. His reign, well, it had some truly devastating consequences. And there's one policy change that shows this swing perfectly.
Yeah, this is such a perfect example of that pendulum we were talking about. Let's look at the jizya tax, basically a tax on non-Muslims. In 1564, you have Akbar, who gets rid of it completely. A huge move, right? A real step toward integration. Then, fast forward over 100 years to 1679, Aurangzeb comes in and brings it right back. And his governors in Kashmir, they enforced it with ruthless, crushing efficiency. Just that one policy tells you everything about two completely different visions for the empire. And for the pundits, it was literally the difference between having some breathing room and facing complete ruin.
But to really get the human cost of this, we need to zoom in. Let's travel back to the autumn of 1680. I want you to picture a man named Ramchand Pandit. He's a landowner, and he's standing in his apple orchard near Anantnag. The air is crisp, you can smell the sweet scent of ripe apples all around you. This orchard, it's not just his job, it's his entire life's work. It's his family's legacy. And then, the tax collectors arrive. They don't just walk in, they thunder in. The demand for the jizya tax is staggering, 3 times the value of his entire harvest. Can you imagine? He pleads with them, of course, but nobody listens. They drive off his cattle, they haul away his sacks of rice. In just one afternoon, his family's entire livelihood is just gone, shattered.
He's left with absolutely nothing, and he has to make an impossible choice. Just before dawn, in that biting cold, he takes his family's sacred icon, the lingam, and he buries it. He hides it deep beneath the roots of an ancient chinar tree, his voice cracking as he says a final prayer. And then he leads his family south, into exile. He watches the snow-capped mountains of his home, his only home, just disappear into the mist. You see, this wasn't just economic policy. This was the uprooting of a people, one family at a time.
But here's where it gets really paradoxical. Even while they were facing this kind of horrific persecution, the pundits were still absolutely essential to the Mughal administration. I mean, the system couldn't run without them. So this created this strange dual existence. On one hand, their skills made them indispensable. On the other, their faith made them outcasts.
Just look at the jobs they were doing. They were the scribes, the revenue officers. Their knowledge of Sanskrit and how local administration worked was vital. They were the ones translating ancient Hindu epics into Persian for the emperor's library. They were court musicians, poets. They brought so much life to the empire. The crazy thing is, in so many ways, the empire literally could not have functioned without them.
And this quote from our source, it just nails that internal conflict. Picture this: a Pandit scholar in the emperor's court. By day, he's translating complex astronomical charts. But then, at night, when he's home, safe and in private, he's teaching his son the sacred verses of their ancestors. And he whispers to him, "We serve to survive, but we remember, so we remain ourselves." Wow, that's it, isn't it? A constant, dangerous balancing act between serving the empire and saving your soul.
Okay, now we have to turn to the darkest side of this era. We're moving beyond economic pressure now, into direct, violent oppression. But just as important, we're going to see how the pundit community, in the face of all this, found these quiet but incredibly determined ways to survive and to hold on to who they were.
Let's go to the spring of 1675. In the bazaars of Srinagar, whispers are starting to fly. The pundits, people are saying, are secretly celebrating their festival, Shivaratri. Now, in the incredibly tense atmosphere of Aurangzeb's rule, a whisper like that, well, that's all it takes to light a fuse.
Twilight falls. A mob forms. It surges toward the pundit quarter. The air gets thick, heavy with wood smoke and just pure dread. The only light? It's from their torches, hissing, casting these wild, frantic shadows everywhere.
Doors are shattered. Homes just erupt into flames. Think about it. Precious manuscripts holding centuries of knowledge, they just curl into black ash and they're gone, forever. The attack is swift, it's brutal, and it has one purpose: to create terror.
In the middle of all that chaos, families are stumbling through back alleys. They're trying desperately to get to the river, to escape by boat. They leave everything behind, just the smoldering ruins of their lives. By the time the sun comes up, there's only silence, and that bitter, awful smell of destruction.
So how do you possibly survive something like that? Well, you learn. You develop an art of survival. Sacred texts, they're hidden in caves or buried in the earth. Festivals, like Shivaratri, they go underground, celebrated in secret behind drawn curtains. The wisdom of generations wasn't passed down on paper that could be burned anymore. It was passed through a living chain, from parent to child, through stories and memory. And their spirit, their identity, they wove it into their art. A quiet but powerful act of defiance.
And all of this brings us to the legacy of the Mughal era for Kashmir's pundits. It's so complex, isn't it? It was an era that built these absolutely stunning gardens, but at the same time, it dug deep graves for cultural memory. It was, without a doubt, a painful chapter. But out of that fire, it forged this unbreakable spirit of resilience.
You know, when you boil it all down, the Mughals brought their courts, their language, their power. They painted the valley with their own culture. But it was just that, a painting, a veneer. Because underneath it all, the ancient indigenous spirit of Kashmir, the one nurtured for thousands of years by the pundits, it survived. It was carried forward in those quiet rituals, in whispered verses, and in a stubborn, unyielding memory. It just refused to be extinguished.
And that really just leaves us with one final thought to chew on. History is full of stories like this, right? Empires rise, they fall, cultures clash, they merge. So what's the secret ingredient? What is it that determines survival? What makes one culture's embers just fade away into ash, while another's keep glowing in the dark, just waiting for the right moment to be rekindled, even centuries down the line?